What's up everyone, how's it going? Today we're finally bringing another Pokemon that was voted in, but one that we didn't have enough time to make in a week. So next up we have Forretress. This bagworm has been around since Gen 2, with most of us having met it as Brock's Pineco, which evolved during a confrontation with a wild Ursaring, and of course Team Rocket. Today we'll find out if Forretress was quite as explosive in the competitive scene. So of course here on FSG, we ask, how good was Forretress actually? But before we start, this video is sponsored by Amino Apps. How good is Amino actually? Turns out pretty good. Amino is a mobile network where you can connect with others over the things you love. They have lots of communities, including some for various animes, Super Smash Bros, and of course, Pokemon. And if you ever want more content that's short form, I particularly like the stories feature because they don't disappear like other places, and I basically get to post extra content for the hardcore viewers that is too short for the YouTube channel. In fact, we have a story right now, 6 notable hazard setters. Click the link in the description or search for Amino Apps on the App Store or Google Play to download Amino. Find my stories by searching Fall Swipe Gaming, then make sure to follow me and click the bell to know when I'm posting more content. Stories, polls, quizzes, and just good old classic posting make Amino a perfect place to see cool stuff for hours at a time. And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Forretress is incredibly key in its debut generation, as not only does it pack spikes, it also packs rapid spin. Spikes are an incredibly important part of the Gold, Silver, and Crystal metagame, and Forretress is most definitely part of the tier spikes metagame. Thus, it has important relationships with the following Pokemon: Cloyster, who spikes and spins, Starmie, who spins, Gengar and Mischievous, who block spin, and Tyranitar and Umbreon, who pursuit Starmie and the Ghost. Cloyster is easier to slap on teams thanks to not having any quadruple weaknesses, its good speed, and its water stab, which also hits Forretress hard. Forretress's advantage is its toxic immunity, giving it the advantage in a prolonged battle, and unlike Cloyster, it can use Explosion alongside Rapid Spin, although that is not even close to its primary function, and it often goes without it. To fight Cloyster, Forretress either goes with Toxic or Giga Drain. Toxic is good for Starmie and Mischievous, while also being useful in some sense against most Pokemon, such as Snorlax. Giga Drain is more immediately useful against Cloyster, and keeps Forretress healthy in the face of those surfs, while turning it into an excellent ride-on counter. However, Forretress must be able to have some sort of route to play for to keep its spikes in the long term. So if Toxic is not used, a Ghost type is preferred, as it also is if Forretress is not running Hidden Power Fire, which it sometimes does despite the colossal bulk loss caused by the necessary DVs, so that it can gain a huge advantage over opposing Forretress, which would otherwise cause a stalemate. As for Forretress spinning, Pursuit support helps, but it can also use Hidden Power Ghost to hit Ghost itself, while having a move to pressure a poisoned Starmie with decently. As you can see, it can be tough for Forretress to safely fit Explosion on its set without making some serious concessions. However, Explosion was always worth considering if it could be fit, which it did when used on offensive teams, chosen over Cloyster to be less weak against Electrics and have the toxic immunity to be able to last against stall teams attempting to quickly choke generic offense out. Being able to spin away spikes and then explode to take a target out, as it could do at reasonable health against targets like Machamp, Vaporeon, and against a sleeping or fireless Snorlax, was one of the biggest turnarounds possible in a GSC game, and is also something Cloyster could not do. Explosion also came in huge because unlike Cloyster, Forretress could easily survive Thunder from Zapdos and Raikou, which was absolutely game-changing, and made these offensive teams more capable of dealing with them, as opposed to the fragile dance they usually had, thanks to Cloyster's deathly fear of them, resulting in risky plays that were necessary to stay alive, and as such could be predicted, such as explosions on the switch, dangerous pivot switching, and electric wars. Though Forretress must be careful in where it sets up. It is meant to stick around for the long haul, and one fire move it was not expecting could be the end of it. Unlike Cloyster getting surprise thundered, Forretress's low speed means it won't even get spikes out of the exchange, except against Snorlax, which can of course paralyze with Body Slam. This applies mostly to Exeggutor and Nidoking, who are not bound to running fire, but are more than capable of doing so effectively, as well as of course Snorlax, and to a lesser extent Gengar. Having to run from Tyranitar early on can be incredibly obnoxious as well. Forretress thus prefers to set up on safer targets such as Heracross, Rhydon, Steelix, and Skarmory. Taking something like a Suicune Surf to get a spin-off may be fine in the short term, but the Forretress user must be careful to not let it get worn down over the course of a longer game, so the domino effect of spikes then overwhelming them doesn't come into play. The toxic immunity is a massive help here as well, but it's gotta watch out for various attacks, especially when Roar Raikou gets into a groove and starts causing havoc with spikes down, tempting Forretress to stay in on a Thunder just so it can get rid of those spikes. This is a common scenario a Forretress user will find themselves themselves in. With stalled teams, Forretress appears on having 4 members scared of Raikou, and the 5th, its own Raikou, being unable to hurt the opposing one, while the one Pokemon that actually can, Snorlax, generally not loving Thunder with spikes down. Taking that Thunder to get a spin-off isn't necessarily a bad trade, such as in the case if one already has their own spikes down, meaning they can use their own Raikou to exert pressure on the opposing spiker and spinner. But if that Pokemon is healthy when this trade happens and threatens to later easily come back in and lay spikes back up, it will make Forretress's one-time effort be for nothing. And if that's the case, it's best to just try and weather the Raikou assault, hoping it doesn't roar into Forretress too many times. This makes the early game spiker positioning and matchups especially crucial, namely punishing Cloyster when it comes in, with things like Toxic Skarmory being a good weapon when it's used to counter Snorlax early game, or Snorlax itself choosing to brawl with Cloyster a number of ways, ranging from Lovely Kiss's sleep, to Thunder luring it to Body Slam's paralysis rate, to Double Edge's pure damage, the last two especially amplified by Curse. It's preferable to be able to do something to Cloyster as it comes in, so Forretress isn't switching into it and then trying to spike and keep spikes off, as that's just not going to work. This early game double switching dance of electrics, spikers, electric checks, and lax checks is crucial and must be handled with care so that the opponent doesn't get those spikes up and thus get ahead absolutely for free. One must be careful to not overly focus on short-term advantages. For example, taking too much damage on Forretress to damage Cloyster, for those can easily wind up losing them the game in the long term, like when Forretress is suddenly in KO range of something and took likely unnecessary damage to get there for a temporary advantage, that being weakening Cloyster, in which the temporary advantage goes away anyway thanks to not seeing the bigger picture. Choosing the right moves and teammates in the team builder and having a plan for these common scenarios goes a long way too. Roar Tyranitar can be even worse to face, since it can even add up the damage on Forretress with Pursuit and threatens a cold one-hit KO with a fire move. On the other hand, the obligatory Skarmory is absolutely food for Forretress, as are Miltank and Charm Umbreon. However, one must be careful in scouting Umbreon's set and respect the possibility of Mean Look and Baton Pass, which is a distinct, potentially game-ending possibility. Forretress is a special case. Sometimes it completely stonewalls both offensive and defensive teams that cheat on their Forretress coverage for advantages elsewhere, and other times it looks like it has to run from what seems like every single one of the opponent's Pokemon. However, if his user is prepared to build and play more carefully with foresight than the comparatively autopilot Cloyster, Forretress shines. It is very much a Pokemon that plays for the long term and fully represents the multifaceted depth of GSC Spike's metagame. Now on to Gen 3, which is the generation where spikes can now go up to 3 layers. Forretress's main spiking competition was now the mighty Skarmory, who was far superior defensively with its impressive typing consisting of a ground immunity and no quadruple weaknesses, meaning it didn't have to necessarily run from every offensive Pokemon with a fire move, which was a lot of them. Skarm also needed less moves to be generally effective because it could rack up damage on everything via Whirlwind. As such, Forretress fell to the wayside as Skarmory moved to the forefront as the tier's premier spiker. However, Forretress's rapid spin was crucial. Skarmory's partners were either limited or were crippled by spikes, meaning it could choose between partnering with other Pokemon that hovered above spikes, which could work, but resulted in a limited pool that could struggle with certain Pokemon like Starmie, or its partners would take the full brunt of spikes. With Forretress, it could remove those spikes and open up the pool of usable partners, making it easier to run Pokemon like Milotic, which thus makes it easier to counter things like mixed Salamence, as well as bolstering the defensive potential of staples like Blissey and Swampert. This was a nice idea in theory, but Forretress was quite helpless to spin against the newly levitating Gengar. However, this is where Pursuit Tyranitar stepped in, removing Gengar and letting Forretress completely sit on Skarmory, totally neutering it and removing the main source of damage those teams so heavily relied on. This was the ideal scenario and became so commonplace that Skarmgar adapted, beginning to use tactics like switching Gengar out of Forretress so it wouldn't be trapped and beginning to rack up spikes from there. Similarly, Forretress was used on bulky defensive teams that couldn't hurt Skarmory much, so Skarmory got plenty of opportunity to switch in and set up without feeling too pressured. While the onus was on Forretress to always spin, less cracks began to appear in its team's armor from spikes damage and an inability to otherwise keep Skarmory from walking over them. This led to scenarios like Skarmory immediately whirlwinding Forretress after spiking. If Forretress decided to spike to exert pressure on Skarmory's team, then Skarmory kept its spikes and the Forretress team was now more on the back foot, and if Forretress spun, then no harm no foul. Skarmory could do it again. Eventually it'd get into into a position where Gengar could come in on the spin almost assuredly without fear of a Tyranitar switch. After all, if Tyranitar tried to switch in as Skarmory Whirlwind with a spike, that 12% could be the start of a potentially very hairy situation, especially if the Skarm's partner Gengar was an offensive variant with Giga Drain or Hidden Power Grass that appreciated the extra damage if it tried to 2-hit KO Tyranitar on the switch, or if it wanted to stay in to 2-hit KO in a 1v1 when predicting pursuit. This kind of method of dealing with Skarmory is so passive and liable to go very wrong, especially once Skarmory started running Drill Peck to beat away Gengar switch-ins Refresh Claydol and Focus Punch Heracross. This let it slowly but surely beat Forretress down by itself, and this is one reason why Forretress is so comparatively low in usage. Another is Forretress's moveset syndrome, since it wants a lot of moves but can only fit 2 in addition to spikes and rapid spin. Explosion lets it thwart various threats like Salamence, Suicune, Snorlax, and even Swampert. There's many a pert that will stay in and wail on Forretress, thinking they may as well punish it for spiking, and it doesn't pose more of a threat beyond that. But this Forretress turns the idea that it's passive on its head. The problem with Explosion is fitting in all the utility one needs in the last slot. With Earthquake, it can thwart Magneton, whose Hidden Power Fire it survives, and actually damage Metagross and Tyranitar. However, those two in theory can be dealt with by Dugtrio. Hidden Power Bug is a more historical move that let it destroy Celebi, Claydol, and hit Tyranitar hard, with Claydol especially being crucial as it would enjoy spinning Forretress's spikes away. Hidden Power Bug also hit bulky Starmie hard, but that was more of a rarity thanks to its relative uselessness against most things besides spikes. Hidden Power Ghost became more preferred, as it allows it to still beat Claydol one-on-one, while actually being able to hit a Gengar switch really hard. It's not foolproof, as one must hit Gengar on the switch, because in a one-on-one it will get Will-O-Wisp, and then Skarmory just beats Forretress. Hitting Gengar on the switch also involves the same kind of dangerous prediction that is so risky in the spin versus the switch to pursuit Tyranitar dynamic. But since it handles Claydol as well, it's not a bad tool to have. Some players even run Zap Cannon, which isn't quite as insane when one views it as a 50% paralysis attack. It's a good move to use against Skarmory because it's useful against it if it stays in, and it of course absolutely ruins Gengar. It's risky, but Forretress is more of a gamble in general, as opposed to the overall superior Skarmory. Spikes are just that strong, and Forretress's usage is a testament to how effective being able to remove spikes with Rapid Spin is. Stealth Rock made Forretress and its spinning more crucial than ever. It usually didn't set up rocks itself, as there were many other excellent users of the move, and it was easier to lay multiple hazards with them spread over multiple Pokemon. Being able to spin against common Stealth Rockers in Metagross and Swampert and punishing them with multiple hazards if they stayed in addition to a crucial Dracometer resistance, was why Forretress became a stall staple in Platinum, which is also where Rotom appliances appeared. On one hand, they were able to preserve Forretress's hazards quite nicely, but on the other hand, they also blocked Forretress's spin quite nicely. However, Forretress wasn't at all helpless against them. With Payback, it was able to hit them really hard. It also benefited from the rise of Choice Scarf Tyranitar. Not only did it pursue the Rotom appliances, but it also absorbed Trick from them and Latios that had previously plagued stalled teams, as they would completely ruin Blissey. This was especially crucial as Key was spinning to preserving the health of Rest Talk Gyarados, which had risen as an incredible physical wall for those teams if Stealth Rock could be kept off the field, and was especially notable for countering famed stall killer Mixed and Fernape. This style of stall as well remained a dominant force in the metagame for quite some time, and became even more powerful once the famously unwallable Salamence, their most prominent threat, was banned. However, the ban of Ment and fellow Dragon Latios resulted in Heatran becoming the most used Pokemon, and its most common set was the offensive Stealth Rock variant, which made it incredibly easy to keep Stealth Rock against Forretress's team, the after effect of which was the Gyarados standing in between his teammates and a Stampede being targeted and swiftly worn down with minimal effort. Spike's Roserade with HP Fire also rose in prominence on offensive teams and similarly threatened Forretress. Being often paired with Heatran, Forretress was unable to switch into either of the opponent's hazard setters. Taking high amounts of hazard damage upon switching in made it significantly less effective. Heatran also became popular on semi-stall teams with especially defensive Stealth Rock set that also ran Roar, dragging in Forretress only to scare it out again. Before, Forretress wasn't threatened by nearly as much on defensive teams, and as such was almost always threatening spin. But now it got worn down uncomfortably quickly, especially since these semi-stall teams could also employ Roserade. As the metagame progressed, other Stealth Rockers rose to prominence, notably Tyranitar and Jirachi, and they also packed fire coverage, which was crucial in keeping the pressure on Forretress and making stall infinitely easier to break. As the Rest Talk Gyarados these teams so anchored on quickly faltered with Stealth Rock up. Then another notable development, which was Latias departing and Infernape's usage rising while Scarf Tyranitar's declined, and as a result, combined to bring Starmie into the limelight. And while it didn't exactly finally appreciate Payback, its powerful hydro pumps would quickly overwhelm Forretress, as well as Rotom trying to spin block. It was a gradual process, but the combined power of Stealth Rockers preventing Forretress from coming in to spin or even lay hazards, in addition to Starmie ridding the hazards Forretress did manage to lay up quite easily, meant that Forretress's teams were instantly put on the back foot, taking tons of damage at every turn and barely being able to do any damage in return. This more offensive metagame ushered out Forretress's era of stall, as its teams were just too passive to keep up. Defensive teams began to prefer Starmie as hazard removal as well, and as Clefable, Gliscor, and Bronzong team styles rose to prominence, the metagame shifted toward not needing to remove opposing hazards at all. These factors led to Forretress completely falling out of favor, and it no longer appears in serious battles. It was dominant, but the meta grew against it, and with great pressure. Now on to the weather generation. While everyone fawned over the new Ferrothorn, Forretress stood strong with its toxic spikes, and more importantly, rapid spin, setting it apart, in addition to being able to easily set up on it. The Rotom appliances were no longer ghosts, and as a result, spinning got much easier. For this reason, Forretress anchored many Sun teams, who required anti-Stealth Rock support for Ninetales' longevity. Magic Bounce, Espeon, and Xatu provided hazard backup to ensure Volcarona would be at full health, and Dugtrio destroyed the Heatran and Tyranitar that would otherwise pose a threat. Forretress could even bait these two in and provide Dugtrio with easy entry by virtue of its new Volt Switch, which also came in incredibly useful when used on sand teams with Tyranitar, who appreciated the safe entrance to cut off Tentacruel's Rain Dish, as well as pursuing the new spin blocker Jellicent, who was also naturally an excellent Fortress partner on Sandstall. When Subtoxic and then Acrobatics Gliscor started terrorizing the tier, Forretress found itself using Hidden Power Ice alongside its natural bulk to counter it, as well as being a solid check to Landorus and Dragons, with Volt Switch protecting it from Magnezone. Forretress Sandstall was one of the most consistent team styles in the metagame at the end of Black and White 1, and this continued well into Black and White 2. However, Rocky Helmet usage increased, as it was discovered that, much like Ferrothorn's Iron Barbs, it was incredibly powerful at beating Rapid Spin, especially on rough skin Garchomp. It didn't even need a spin blocker, though it certainly helped, and Jellicent was a great Pokemon. And just as in DPP, teams became anti-spikes, with Rocky Helmet Skarmory joining the fray to float above Forretress's hazards while easily wearing it down to keep their own, and setting up a late game sweep for one of the Magic Guard psychics like Alakazam or Reuniclus, who were completely immune to hazards. This was an especially synergistic combination with Jellicent, who tended to bait in and burn Tyranitar, who would usually check them with a Chapel Berry set. However, even without Jellicent, Tyranitar would get worn down incredibly quickly with how powerful and difficult to remove spikes were. Teams that didn't crumble the spikes were better than ever and more consistent than those that relied on the field being cleared of them, and as such, Forretress once again fell out of the metagame for the exact same reasons as in DPP. With the fog coming around to both thwart its hazards and take its place as a hazard remover, Forretress dropped to the wayside instantly, finding itself in UU for the first time. The fog made it less focused on pure hazard stacking, though if teams had a Stealth Rocker, it wouldn't say no to carrying spikes. However, this was secondary to its now main purpose. Forretress was now usually focused on being able to remove the opposition's hazards while maintaining its own, which was a luxury with the fog around, and was valuable even if it was just Stealth Rock. Forretress sometimes used Stealth Rock as its sole hazard, which was previously nigh unheard of. It was great at using its typing and bulk as a buffer against defensive Pokemon like Florges and Alomomola, getting a spin or hazard if needed, but mainly using its slow Volt Switch to get its big, powerful teammates in safely. It was also a solid counter against some of the tier's more dangerous offensive threats, such as Whimsicott, Haxorus, and Mega Aerodactyl. And unfortunately, Forretress was comparatively unspectacular to its hazard stacking glory days, but it was crucial to the success of many of the tier's most important squads. With UU's power level rising thanks to Z moves, Forretress found itself in RU for Gen 7. And it was more niche, thanks to the various ghosts in the tier preventing its spins, like Mismagius, Jellicent, Alola Marowak, and Dual Blade. And Pursuit being relatively unreliable because of the frailty of the Pursuiters, as well as Mismagius and Jellicent commonly running Cobra Berry, thanks to Knockoff's popularity, while Dual Blade was one of the most physically bulky Pokemon in the game. As such, Forretress didn't even always run Rapid Spin for the first time, which freed up a move slot for something that actually be useful and let it act as a check to more things, usually toxic, which was generally useful, most notably to hit Mandibuzz, Jellicent, and Mega Blastoise. Gyro Ball also let it act as a solid counter to Zygarde 10%, Flygon, and Linoon, alongside its tremendous bulk, which also helped stave off the monstrous Escavalier and Beware. Forretress had to watch out for fire coverage, which was everywhere, and impeding it from ever getting too comfortable or spammable, but for the most part, it was a fine Pokemon that provided some much needed backbone for offense. And before we end, you're probably wondering, why haven't we covered VGC? Well, that's an easy answer. Yeah, hazards basically don't appear in VGC because there is significantly less switching compared to singles, being 4-on-4 doubles and all. So you're probably wasting a turn by trying to set them up. And Forretress has little other roles to fill that aren't already taken by other bug and steel types, or bulky Pokemon. And as such, we found literally no notable uses of it in tournaments. So yeah, oh well. And that's it. So how good was Forretress actually? Well, its use in its first 4 generations is symbolic of and a testament to the power of entry hazards, as well as rapid spin to combat them. Unfortunately, it was entirely a hazard machine, and that lent itself to a certain passivity that eventually would be taken advantage of, just as much as its infamous fire weakness. In more recent generations, it's less of an enabler with hazards and more of a counter to Pokemon, thanks to the decreased power level of the lower tiers it finally dropped to after so long, which lends it to acting as a backbone on offense, rather than the cornerstone of defense it was originally an icon of. Forretress is one of the most successful singles Pokemon of all time, and embodies the concept and importance of entry hazards to the fullest. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And as for the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Forretress? What would you give it to bring it back to relevancy? Do you even want it to come back to relevancy in singles? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And as explained in the beginning of the video, this Pokemon was voted for a while ago. We just didn't have time to make it. And to vote for the Pokemon that we're gonna cover next week, vote by commenting on the community posts that will go up around the same time or a little bit after this video's release. And of course, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.